The supper bell. The Bogard mansion's dining bell rang once, deep, resonant, metallic. It was a sound that could be heard across the courtyard and beyond the gates, a summons to elegance and ritual. But to Violet, it was the tolling of a funeral bell. Hers, Samuel's, maybe everyone's. The air in New Orleans that night was thick as molasses, clinging to the skin, pressing into the lungs. Cicadas shrieked from the garden, a maddening chorus that seemed to mock her pounding heart. Violet stood in the kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the heavy oak table until her knuckles turned white. Around her, pots simmered with rich sauces, bread cooled on wicker racks, and the scent of roasted squab and praline custard filled the air. The feast was perfect, but this was no ordinary supper. She glanced toward the door leading to the courtyard where the stable lanterns burned low. Samuel should have run by now, should have been halfway to the river with the night wind at his back. Instead, she felt that he was still here somewhere watching, waiting. "Miss Violet," whispered Lily, the young maid whose eyes darted nervously like a cornered doe. "They're ready for the first course." Violet's gaze drifted toward the polished silver tureen of turtle soup waiting on the counter. The steam curled up in ghostly fingers. She lifted the ladle, inhaling deeply, not to admire her work but to steady her resolve. Tonight would not be about survival. Tonight would be about reckoning. The mansion that breathed, the Bogard mansion, was not merely a house, it was a beast. At night it groaned with settling timbers and sighed through its shutters, as though exhaling the secrets of everyone who had ever lived there. Violet had grown up within its shadow, first as a barefoot child running errands between the smokehouse and scullery, then as head cook with the weight of its reputation on her back. Each hallway was mapped in her mind, each floorboard memorized. She knew where the wood creaked and where the marble was cooled even on summer days. She knew the pantry door that never quite latched, the kitchen window where she and Samuel once whispered dreams they could never say aloud. The mansion's heartbeat was her own. Its rhythms had dictated every hour of her life. But lately the house had started to feel different. The air tasted of iron and storm water. The candles smoked too much, leaving greasy stains on the ceiling. And Violet swore that at night, as she lay on her straw mattress, she could hear something pacing the halls, dragging its feet. Like a restless spirit in search of justice. Octave Bogard's household. Octave Bogard was a man who mistook fear for respect. At 43 he carried himself like a general, every gesture sharp, every order absolute. His Greek revival mansion was his fortress, his table his throne, and his wife Celeste his perfectly dressed ornament. Celeste floated through rooms like a pale moth, beautiful but brittle. Her eyes were always elsewhere, often on the decanter of brandy hidden behind lace curtains. The children, Etienne, Margot, Philippe, and little Amalie, were as carefully polished as the silverware, taught to speak when spoken to and never question their father. The household was full tonight. Octave's younger brother Auguste and his wife Lucille, the twins Henri and Louis, old Grand-mère Bogard who ruled from her velvet chair, and Celeste's hawk-eyed sister Tante Félicité. Around them swirled New Orleans society, their priest, their banker, their merchant allies, gathered for what Octave boasted would be the finest supper of the season. Violet had prepared for this night with a precision that would have impressed a surgeon. But there was something more in her preparations this time, a stillness in her movements, an eerie calm, as though she had been chosen by something larger than herself to bring balance to the world. 3 days without bread. Everything had begun 3 days earlier, when Octave's temper, already sharpened by debts and failing harvests, had snapped like a whip. Samuel had been found in the courtyard, bloodied, accused of daring to look too long at young Margot. The beating was savage. Violet had intervened, an unforgivable breach. Her punishment had been cruel but elegant. She was to keep cooking as usual, but forbidden to eat until every member of the family declared themselves satisfied. And Octave predictably had not been satisfied. For 3 days she'd lived on nothing but water, her vision dimming, her strength waning, but hunger had done more than hollow her out. It had carved her into something new, something sharp-edged. Standing in the dining room corner, stomach gnawing itself raw, watching Octave taste her food with smug delight, something inside her had quietly shifted. By the end of the 3rd day, Violet was no longer afraid. The quiet decision, On the morning of the supper, Violet woke before dawn and sat in the stillness of the kitchen. The sun had not yet risen, but she lit a single candle and took out the small paper packets she had hidden behind the flour bins. Each packet was carefully labeled, each ingredient measured to the smallest pinch. She laid them out in order, like a priest preparing for communion. There was no trembling in her hands, no hesitation. When Lily entered to begin polishing the silver, she found Violet bent over the stove, humming softly to herself for the first time in weeks. The sound made the hair on the back of Lily's neck rise. As the first course left the kitchen on a silver tray, Violet wiped her hands on her apron and looked toward the dark hallway beyond. Somewhere down there, Octave was waiting at the head of the table, ready to take his first sip of soup. Somewhere, Samuel was waiting too, though whether for salvation or damnation, Violet no longer knew. And somewhere in the house, unseen but very present, the Bogard mansion seemed to hold its breath. The first cracked silence fell in the dining room when the turtle soup was served. But it wasn't the reverent silence of awe. It was something heavier, something Violet could feel even from behind the kitchen door. A hush thick as velvet, like the moment before lightning strikes. She stood in the shadows and watched through the narrow crack. The Bogard sat poised like porcelain figurines, the candlelight sharpening their fine features, blurring their flaws. Octave presided at the head of the table, chin high, eyes glittering like cut glass. They dipped silver spoons into the amber broth. Steam curled around their faces like ghostly fingers. And then, nothing. No explosions of praise. No dramatic swooning at the taste. Just the slow, synchronized motion of mouths chewing and swallowing as if they were part of a single, monstrous organism. Violet's pulse thundered in her ears. She had expected something. A cough, a grimace, a raised eyebrow. Instead, their stillness unnerved her more than screams ever could. The clockwork feast. The dinner moved forward like the gears of an intricate clock. Old Moses, grave and silent, drifted from the kitchen to the dining room like a shadow on rails, carrying trays laden with pompano and saffron cream, fowl stuffed with rice and pecans, glazed carrots and buttered asparagus arranged with military precision. Violet followed each dish with her eyes as though they were arrows loosed from her bow. Every plate returned scraped clean. Compliments floated back like drifting feathers. "Exquisite," said Mayor Shuto, dabbing his whiskers with a linen napkin. "Transcendent," murmured Judge Dufresne. Even Grosmaire Bogard, who normally found fault in the curvature of a pastry, simply closed her eyes and hummed. To anyone else, it looked like Violet had ascended to new culinary heights. To Violet, it felt like laying down the final stones of a tomb. Samuel in the shadows, in the courtyard beyond the kitchen window. Samuel lurked like a ghost, tethered to his grief. His back was still swathed in linen from the beating, his movements careful, but his eyes burned bright in the lantern light. He had promised himself he would leave before nightfall, yet here he was, unable to tear his soul from hers. He watched the flickering silhouettes in the dining room, watched Violet's still figure by the kitchen door, and felt a chill colder than river fog creep into his bones, because something about her posture was different. Too still, too composed, like someone watching a fire they themselves had set. A subtle wrongness. The first sign came with August. He paused mid-laugh, his spoon halfway to his mouth, and frowned faintly as though the air had shifted. His hand trembled, spilling a single drop of red wine onto the white tablecloth, a drop that bloomed outward like a spreading wound. "Too much brandy," he chuckled, brushing it off, but his voice caught on the edge of the words. Then Celeste's silk fan slipped from her fingers. She blinked at it on the carpet as though confused by gravity. Violet's lips barely moved. "It begins," she whispered. No one heard her but the house. The house listens. The Bogard mansion seemed to lean closer, as if listening. The crystal chandeliers chimed faintly, though no breeze stirred them. The portraits on the walls, stern patriarchs and pale matrons, seemed to watch more intently, their painted eyes gleaming with candlelight. Violet stood perfectly still in the kitchen doorway, breathing shallowly, her fingers splayed against the doorframe. She could feel the house's bones around her, humming like a plucked string. She had grown up believing the mansion was indestructible. Tonight she realized it was hollow, a shell of pride and cruelty, fragile as spun sugar. From the dining room came a sudden, sharp clatter. Every head turned toward Philippe, who sat stiffly in his chair, fork fallen from his hand. His face had gone pale as candle wax. "Are you well, my boy?" Octave demanded. Philippe opened his mouth, but only a strangled rasp came out, half breath, half scream, and then his eyes rolled back. The room erupted. Violet closed her eyes, inhaled the scent of roasted squab and praline custard drifting through the air, and thought, the first crack has come. The masquerade cracks for a moment. No one breathed. Philippe's fork lay on the table like a dropped blade, the silver tines quivering from the impact. His head lolled against the carved back of his chair, lips pale, eyes half closed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Then the sound returned, sharp and frantic, the scrape of chairs, the hiss of skirts, voices overlapping in rising panic. But to Violet, it all sounded distant, like listening through thick glass. The slow unraveling doctor. Thibodeau lunged from his seat, sending his brandy glass spinning across the linen. He pressed 2 fingers to Philippe's neck, muttering sharp medical syllables like charms against chaos. "He's breathing," he snapped, as if accusing the boy of it. "Likely fainted from the heat, nothing more." But Violet saw the truth, the faint shimmer of sweat on his upper lip, the way his eyelids fluttered too fast. Not heat, not fear. The gears beginning to slip. Celeste fanned herself with trembling hands, her gaze flicking toward Violet at the kitchen door. Quick, guilty, like someone caught staring at the hangman. A house out of time. The chandelier above them swayed once, though no breeze stirred the heavy drapes. Violet's eyes tracked the movement. It was subtle, almost graceful, like the first tilt of a sinking ship. And then something stranger. The clock on the mantel ticked too slowly, each second stretching like taffy, while the candle flames leaned unnaturally straight as if frozen mid-dance. No one else seemed to notice. But Violet did. She always noticed. The mansion was slipping. Not collapsing, not yet, just forgetting which way was forward. The masks slip Philippe stirred, mumbling, and Thibodeau declared it exhaustion and rich food. Everyone laughed too loudly in relief, but the masks were cracking. August's smile froze at the edges, too many teeth showing like a cornered animal. Grand-mère Bogard sipped her wine and missed her mouth entirely, crimson streaking her jaw like war paint. Little Amélie sat very still, staring at Violet with the wide, unblinking eyes of a barn owl. For the first time in her 8 years, she looked at Violet not as furniture, but as something alive. Something dangerous. Violet inclined her head ever so slightly. A silent acknowledgement. Amélie didn't blink. Samuel's desperation in the courtyard. Samuel pressed both palms to the glass of the French doors, his breath fogging small crescents on the panes. He wanted to burst in, to grab Violet by the wrist and drag her away from this slow-dying play. But his body stayed rooted because he saw something terrible. She was glowing, not with light, something deeper, a quiet cold radiance like moonlit stone. It was the look of someone who had already made peace with damnation. He whispered her name to the glass, but the sound didn't carry. Inside, Violet stepped forward at last, silent as spilled ink, every face turned toward her as though pulled by a single invisible thread. Her voice cut through the strained chatter, soft and precise. "Shall we continue with the next course?" She didn't wait for an answer. She turned, gliding back toward the kitchen as the dining room fell quiet behind her. And as she passed the mantel clock, it ticked backward once audibly like a nail being driven in reverse. When the music breaks, the scream didn't sound human. It rose from the far end of the table, a high, thin wail that made the chandeliers tremble and the crystal glasses sing. Celeste was on her feet, her silk skirts tearing as she lurched backward, knocking over her chair. Her hands clawed at her throat as if invisible fingers were tightening there. Around her, conversation crumbled into noise, shouts, curses, gasps, as if the air itself had shattered. And through it all, Violet moved like water. The feast turns. The air in the dining room had thickened, humid and sour. Perfume soured to vinegar, roast meat to rot. August bent double with a guttural grunt, his watch tumbling from his pocket and skittering across the floor. He tried to rise, slipped on his own spilled wine, and hit the table edge hard enough to crack the wood. Henry and Louis were laughing, wild. hiccuping bursts that curdled mid-breath into choking coughs. Mayor Shuto's face had gone a frightening shade of plum. He slammed his fist on the table as if bargaining with his own body. The sound of fracturing it was the sound that made it real. Forks clinking, chairs toppling, the frantic scrape of slippers on polished wood. An orchestra of panic, discordant and sharp. Violet heard it the way a conductor hears a symphony, each dissonant note slotting perfectly into the score she had composed. The house seemed to lean in, hungry. The portraits on the walls blurred as if the painted eyes were rolling back in ecstasy, and the grandfather clock, silent for decades, began to tick. Again backwards. Samuel breaks the glass. Samuel's restraint snapped like a brittle bone. He burst through the French doors in a spray of shattered glass, skidding across the parquet. His boots crunched crystal as he shouted, "Violet! Stop this!" Dozens of fevered eyes swung toward him. Some guests blinked as if they didn't recognize him. Others didn't blink at all. Octave staggered upright, his face sheened with sweat, his jaw slack. "This is your doing," he rasped, pointing a trembling finger at Violet. "Which?" The word dissolved into a violent cough, a red spray marring the white tablecloth like spilled ink. Violet, the calm Violet, turned at last to face them all. Her expression was not cruel. It was tranquil, like the eye of a hurricane that has chosen where it will land. "Please," she said softly, almost apologetically. "Remain seated. The dessert has not yet been served." Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. For one surreal moment they obeyed. Even Samuel froze mid-step, his outstretched hand trembling in the candlelight. And then little Amélie gave a small, breathy laugh. Every head jerked toward her. She was sitting perfectly still in her chair, her white dress immaculate, her tiny shoes dangling. Her smile was serene, dreamy. "I can taste the stars," she whispered. And then she slumped forward, face first into her untouched praline custard. As the chandeliers flickered violently and one by one the candles blew out without wind. The house that ate the light, the darkness didn't fall. It folded, like velvet pulled over a birdcage. One moment the chandeliers blazed, and the next, the candles guttered to black and silence pounced, thick, absolute, like the house had inhaled every whisper and refused to exhale. No one screamed at first because sound felt illegal. Disoriented shapes, then came the chaos. A chair skidded. Glass shattered. Someone sobbed like a child trying to keep quiet under a bed. In the sudden dark, the grand dining room shrank to the size of a coffin. Perfume and sweat mingled into a sour musk. Hands clawed the air, searching for table edges, for each other, for proof that the world was still real. Someone whispered, "Amélie?" and was answered by nothing at all. The house changes its shape. The mansion had always been orderly, predictable. Now it shifted like a living thing rolling in its sleep. The walls groaned. The parquet floor tilted, just enough to make standing treacherous. The clock in the hall chimed 13, though no one had wound it in decades. Samuel's breathing came ragged. He reached for the French doors he'd smashed through and found smooth wall. No door. No glass. The house had sealed itself. Whispers and dim orange glow flared in the hall, then died. Not candlelight. The cold shimmer of kitchen coals. A shape passed at the edge of sight. The crisp flutter of white apron cloth. The gleam of a copper ladle catching phantom light. "Violet." Samuel croaked. "Please, where are you?" Her voice floated back like smoke. "I'm right where I've always been." And then nearer. "In the kitchen." "Desperate flight, doctor." Thibodeau stumbled forward, clutching the table for balance. His medical bag thudded to the floor, spilling tinctures that rolled like lost marbles into the dark. "Out," he hissed. "We must get them out." But the air had turned thick, syrupy. Each breath was an effort. Each step dragged like wading through tar. Someone blundered toward the doorway and screamed, cut short as if swallowed mid-word. Only the wet thud of something unseen dropping to the floor marked where they had been. The silent kitchen door, and there it was. At the far end of the warped dining room, framed in the faint reddish glow of banked coals, stood the kitchen door, perfectly still, perfectly straight. Light leaked from its edges like blood through bandages. Every survivor in the room turned toward it at once, drawn by something deeper than reason. Because somehow, they all knew that door was the heart of this night, and Violet was waiting behind it. Samuel took the first step toward the door. His boots whispered against warped wood. Behind him, someone moaned, someone prayed, someone retched, but Samuel only heard his pulse pounding like a drum, and Violet's soft, distant humming, rising from the kitchen like a lullaby played on broken glass. He placed his hand on the door. The wood was warm, and it pulsed. The last course. The kitchen was glowing, not lit, not burning. Glowing, as if the air itself had turned to amber. The door sighed inward under Samuel's hand, warm and damp like living flesh. And for the first time since the night began, the smell changed. Gone was the sour stink of fear and sickness. Now it smelled good, like pralines cooling on polished marble, like cinnamon warming on cast iron, like Sunday mornings from a life he'd never lived. The stillness, the chaos behind him stopped at the threshold like an obedient hound. Silence reigned here, thick and complete. Pots gleamed as though freshly scrubbed. Copper molds winked in the amber glow. The great hearth smoldered gently, casting slow, syrupy shadows. And there at the long wooden table sat Violet. Her apron was immaculate. Her hands were folded, and her eyes were calm. 2 black stones at the bottom of a still pond. Violet's confession. "I saved them," she said softly, before he could speak. Samuel's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "They were drowning," Violet continued, her voice even and distant, "in the sweetness of their own lies, so I gave them something honest. Something that didn't pretend to be anything but what it was." She rose without haste. Her shadow didn't follow her. It stayed seated. The empty plates on the table lay 13 porcelain plates. Each was spotless, bone-white, as if they'd never held food. As if no one had ever eaten at all. Samuel felt the air press tighter around his chest. "What did you do to them?" he whispered. Violet tilted her head like a teacher humoring a slow student. "I stopped feeding them," she said. "And the house. Finished the rest." The truth about the house as she spoke. The walls shifted. The kitchen stretched, its bricks sagging like tallow, its ceiling yawning upward into blackness. Shapes bulged beneath the plaster, human-sized and twitching like memories trying to escape the walls. "The house was always hungry," Violet murmured. "Every cruelty they served here, it swallowed. And when it was full, it needed someone to ring the dinner bell." Her gaze locked on his. "I rang it, Samuel. Her offer." She stepped closer until her breath warmed his cheek. "You can leave," she whispered. "Go now and you will forget. You'll wake in some other place, another life. You will not know my name." Or her fingers brushed the back of his hand, light as steam. "You can stay, and never hunger again." Behind her, the hearth flared suddenly white-hot. And for an instant, Samuel saw figures in the fire, Octave Celeste, little Amélie, smiling, content, devoured. The last bite. Samuel's lips parted, a word trembling there, half prayer, half sob. But Violet only smiled, sad and beautiful and bottomless. She placed a single silver spoon on the table between them. "Choose," she said, and the kitchen collapsed into darkness, leaving nothing behind but the echo of a woman's laugh and the faint, lingering smell of praline.